Good afternoon, everyone. I'm G. Davis, and I'm the university librarian. I'm very excited to welcome everyone to the title of this event is Seeing Lost Enclaves, Archival Reconstructions of Neighborhoods of Color. And then our speaker is Jeffrey Yoo Warren. So I'm very excited to introduce him to you all. And we are also recording, so the recording of this event should be available via library website. So Jeffrey Yoo Warren is an artist, a researcher, and the 2023 Innovator in Residence at the Library of Congress. Jeffrey has built immersive digital reconstructions of historic Chinatowns that have been erased and forgotten over time. He uses photographs, maps, film, and audio recordings based on archival collections to help us to see what has been lost. Actually, I looked him up because I was fascinated. And so I searched him and I found a few YouTube recording and it was fascinating. The one that I watched was about how the sound, generating the sound of the 1930s at the time of the Chinatown. So it was fascinating and I strongly recommend you to look it up. Jeffrey's work is more than just digital exploration. It has a real world impact on communities like ours here in DC. Using digital methods and models, he investigates how people build their identities through interactions with places, objects, and history. His work supports the remembrance of marginalized communities. Most importantly, Jeffrey's work makes these places more than just memories. He makes them real for anyone who views his reconstructions. He connects people to their past and honors what came before us. This dedication to reviving lost communities and marginalized narratives underpins our commitment to building a diverse, inclusive, and equitable environment here at American University. Jeffrey's mapping and documenting of community histories directly aligns with the library's mission to apply discovered knowledge and innovative technologies to the world's most pressing challenges. Thank you for being with us today, and please join me in welcoming Jeffrey Yoo Warren to American University.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, I'm going to give a little background on the project and also talk about my residency at the Library of Congress and what is coming in the next year. But I think the sort of important starting point for me in this work, you know, as you mentioned, I'm an artist, I'm an educator, and I'm not a historian or an archivist, notably, and so my approach to this work is a little distinct. And actually, even the form of my work is a little unusual for me. Most of my artistic practice is very hands-on, like I'm woodworking and working with paper and all kinds of things. So ceramics. So to be doing a digital, like a virtual project, yeah, in a sense, I even had some doubts about it. And you can see, I guess, as I'll show, the direction that it kind of went led back into physical works as well. So, but the story for me began in 2018 when a group of scholars at Brown University's Center for Public Humanities put up some temporary plaques in my neighborhood, talking about how it used to be Chinatown in Providence. And given that there is no Chinatown in Providence today, it was very surprising to find these plaques and to learn about this. Among other things, that the famous activist Grace Lee Boggs was born on the street I live on, in this community, and just many other things that were not at all apparent, like on the street, and not part of the story that the city kind of tells about itself and understands about itself. Although I guess I'm hoping to change that. These three pictures were on they're on their website, richinesehistory.com, as well as on one of the plaques. And honestly, at the beginning, I didn't even know what I was looking at. Like, what streets, what street corner is this? What direction am I looking? And of course, a couple of them are not very good photos. But in the way that I think about things, I tried to kind of get into the space visually and immersively. I tried to imagine, what it might have looked like if they had not been torn down on the street that I know so well and I walk on every day. So I tried like this sort of crude Photoshop. I tried illustrating it. And I began to kind of almost see the outlines of these buildings in what is now the middle of the street as I walked down the street as the seasons changed. And I also began really digging into the archival photos that existed, as well as finding some new ones to better understand what specific changes, like which buildings were torn down, and what the sort of history leading up to that moment and afterwards looked like. And I would find, for example, on the right side, the billboard in the red circle is the same as the back side of the photo on the left side. Sorry, I have trouble with lefts and rights, and I'm also pointing the wrong direction. But yeah, that's two sides of the same billboard, or the shape of a window sill in one image versus the other. So I began to sort of piece together. Oh, sorry, touching the microphone. I began to sort of piece together what we were looking at in each of these pictures, as well as in photos from before and after. But one thing that really kept recurring is that the photos, and you can understand contextually how this is the case. Photos that I could find were always just outside of Chinatown, not quite seeing Chinatown. Always, it was kind of around the corner or just out of view. In both of these pictures, if you could just go around the corner right by that kind of rocket ship-shaped tower, you would be able to see Chinatown at different moments in time. And here also, there's that overhanging balcony. I think right there. If you could go around that corner, you would see Chinatown. But very rarely getting a glimpse of Chinatown itself. And I also began getting some, tapping into some skills from when I did an undergraduate in architecture. I tried making simple models of the neighborhood to just see if I could take these pictures and weave them into something that had a feeling of place. And I began getting more obsessive about collecting photos, understanding which photos fit in which spot, and what year each photo was taken. Really getting more rigorous about my collecting of these things, and even to the point of making sort of pegboards and things like that, treating it almost like a mystery of some kind. And many of the images, of course, were revealing, but also many of them were racist. From that period, the photographers were almost, to our knowledge, exclusively white photographers or illustrators. And you never know, like in an illustration, what can you trust about this picture? Was it someone who was actually there? And despite the depiction, is it like a relatively factual depiction of like a shelf and a table, or is this just sort of made up? Who knows? But if you begin to follow that trend and sort of really pay close attention, you would always notice things, or very often notice things in the corners of places. So here, this article about a Romanesque church included in the corner a picture of a restaurant at 347 Weybosset Street, and you can see the awning, just barely you can make out. It says Oriental Restaurant and chop suey above it. You can begin to correlate with advertisements from that time period. You can see as well the kind of oppressive policing that was experienced by this community appear a lot of times in the newspaper, and much of the coverage is about criminality and other sort of ways that the white press would understand this neighborhood. And I do think it's important to note that that places really clear limits on how much you can learn about the community through sources like that. But I also met folks like John Engwang, who has studied this community for decades, and who shares my passion for digging through these old records. So here you can see on the table that's a bound copy of 1 year's worth of Providence Journal articles and original copies. It's falling apart as we thumb through it. And with with John, I was able to find these new images of the neighborhood having just been torn down, showing some of the buildings from that period, and getting, in some cases, our first look at some of the buildings that weren't in any other photographs, placing those on maps and kind of lining them up and starting to make a model of this neighborhood. And in some cases, I would leave the newsprint on there, is a sort of a visual sign of the lack of knowledge about it, the sort of gap in the record as well. The newspaper articles, I mean, a lot of them very difficult to read, full of racist sort of depictions and things, but also difficult in the sense that they depict a kind of a violence to this neighborhood. There's a top right picture here is the same angle as the original photo I showed you in the beginning of the presentation, but the house was only half torn down in that picture, whereas in the lower one it's fully torn down. And I felt, even though there is a limit to what you can learn here, I went through every single article in the Providence Journal, 1904 to 1914, and just wrote down anything that was mentioned about the community. And there was just dozens and dozens of articles, as well as I wrote down people's names. I was able to reconstruct kind of an address book of people's businesses and homes. But there are a lot of writers who I think write very critically and importantly about sort of quantitative approaches to history. I think that in the case of Jamel Bouie is writing about the transatlantic slave trade and how ledgers have been used to uncover things about people's lives. And I think he's right to warn that shouldn't be the only way that you understand these communities, or sort of to point out the challenges, even though that also seems like an opportunity to unearth new information about people. And I think the other part about this is that there is a degree of personal connection which comes into this. I'm Korean American, but I do feel a real connection to this earliest Asian American community in this city, and have definitely shared experiences of racism even in in the 2020s that give me, make these particularly salient to me. And so I think another inspiration of mine has been Saidiya Hartman, who writes about a technique or sort of a methodology she calls critical fabulation, which is also archivally based, but employs speculation and deep research and a sort of a deep personal connection to people's lives to try to understand what was happening between these sort of data points, so to speak. And she does an amazing job in Wayward Lives, her book, of imagining incorporating a remarkable amount of archival supportive material, but imagining the internal lives of people who are photographed. And for her, she was writing about, in that book, young Black women in Philadelphia and New York who appear in photographs, but sort of speculating their internal lives. And so when I do occasionally get internal, indoor photos of, for example, a kitchen or a restaurant or something like that, or sometimes even occasionally a portrait or something like that, it's very special, and I feel like it's a glimpse into something deeper about this community. I think maybe I'll move ahead here. Yeah, this is just showing, I mean, this is more like, I wish I could do this than that I was successful, but in the prior picture, if you can get original photos, I tried zooming into a reflection in the window because this is facing Chinatown, and you could read like a street sign in the reflection. And so it is kind of interesting to me. The Providence Journal archives, the photo archives, are not public, and I hope someday will be. But if you can get those original 8x10 prints, I do think that you can get some glimpses of things that are actually important. This is probably, wishful thinking in terms of seeing Chinatown in the reflection. But it's that kind of close paying attention that I think will bear some fruit. So just about the process of making a virtual model, I'll find these sorts of buildings that surround Chinatown and the buildings of Chinatown and take the facades, I trace them, kind of flatten them out, and then map them onto pretty simple voids or boxes, prisms sort of, and then get the sizes right. Sometimes it's a collage of contemporary photos and historic photos. And then slowly as you add this surface, that window, it begins to form together. And some buildings, especially those at the heart of Chinatown, like this is the headquarters of the Unliang Merchants Association. It's a community organization that provided material support for newcomers. It had lodging. It was a sanctuary space for people escaping police persecution. So this building, I had essentially no good photos of the front, but a very good photo of the side. So I was able to kind of use pictures of the windows to reconstruct the front facade. And although it's a judgment call, like whether it's worth spending all that time to do that. But in some ways, for me, it was also kind of a healing process to look at those original photos that are so low quality and to kind of piece the facade back together and enable a closer look at it. So after creating all these different buildings, I began working with another artist, Alicia Renee Ball, who specializes in sort of 3D reconstruction and 3D kind of atmospheric work. And we began doing things like adding weather effects, sunrise or sunset lighting, trying to think about like what are your most powerful memories and what are the kind of things that will really bring you back and enable you to connect emotionally with a space, rather than just sort of like a clinical, this is a diagram or a rendering. And I definitely gravitate towards like evening photography where I try to light up the insides of buildings and things like that. And people began actually sending, because I post a lot of my stuff on Instagram as I go, so I share a lot of the process. And people began like sending me Google Drives and like photos and stuff like that, people who had other pictures. And so I think it's like a interesting ongoing process where a lot of photos are sitting in drawers or whatever, and people may not know. Like the folks the person who collected the images on the top of both of these didn't know, maybe still doesn't know, that these are pictures of Chinatown or the surrounding area of Chinatown, but had just sort of collected them all up as a obsessive collector for I guess other reasons. And so being able to sort of decode these and fit them back together has been really, really powerful. And some of them are kind of disturbing, like this one where they're cutting through all the buildings to open up a new street. And then there are just a few pictures which are mysterious, but also very, very, personal feeling. And this one, I just always want to note, nobody's sure where exactly in Providence it was, but these are just two kids, presumably growing up in Chinatown around 1900. And it's just a really remarkable photo. But yeah, its exact provenance or the location or names are all sort of lost. Irene Luke Hope is someone who I met along the way, who's archivist at Beneficent Church, which is a block away from Chinatown, and was a major supporter of the Chinese American community at that time, offering language classes, also trying to like convert people, but generally being especially for its time, a very inclusive church. And Irene has grown up in the church and is the steward now of this big collection of photos of, and in some cases by, Chinese American folks in Providence. So it was really cool to meet her, and as a descendant and someone who also is interested in archival materials. And Irene is also really interesting to talk to because her family ran this famous restaurant, Luke's, in downtown Providence, and she has memories from the 40s and 50s of working in the family restaurant, and she was kind enough to tell me like all kinds of things about. I always ask like, I was like, okay, what was the layout of the kitchen? Like I have such specific questions. But in talking with her, I was able to do this colorization of the front to try to also do a kind of reconstruction based on her memories in the oral history. And this one was cool, although I remember I sent it to her and she was like, oh yeah, it looks just like it did. And then like 5 minutes later, she sent me a second email and said, but wait, the word restaurant was in green. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, don't worry, we can fix that. And I went and redid that, although I don't have the picture right here. But yeah, that kind of thing is, I mean, it's powerful, of course, because people tend to think that if Chinatown is gone, that the community is gone, which is definitely not the case. But also, it's just, yeah, 1914, which is the year that this era of Chinatown ended, the buildings were torn down. Feels like a long time ago, but you know, Irene and people of her generation who I've spoken with, they do have living memory of people who lived in these buildings, and you know, the community maintains continuity as you know in community and family memories, which I think is very important. So as the project came together, I began especially focusing on nighttime scenes, and I began hosting visits, especially for Asian American folks. This one was for the Autumn Festival, Harvest Festival, so I put the full moon in there, and it was kind of nice to have this space. And I really, I mean, for me, the most important audience is the Asian American community in Providence today, especially descendants, but also our community is quite diverse these days. There are Korean Americans like myself, there's Cambodian Americans. It's a big group of people who, in some sense, I think do feel connected to this earliest community in this city. And so the ability to spend time there, even like to get like lost in the alleys, is something that's very special. And one reason that having an interactive space, as opposed to just like a video about it or something like that, is really cool. So yeah, you can kind of log into it on your laptop and wander around. And the kind of images that you were able to get from this, and to see that are different from the archival images, include things like Saidiya Hartman does. It's an inversion. Almost all the pictures are pictures from the outside looking in. And there's very few people because the photographers did not have a good relationship with the community. So like nobody wanted to stand around and pose for it, which is something Hartman writes about as well, the kind of refusal to be part of the documentation. But in creating this environment, the ability to like look out a bedroom window and imagine yourself seeing the neighborhood closing up, you know, the shopkeepers, you know, closing the doors and cleaning up the sidewalk or whatever, you know, the sort of daily routines is something you can imagine much more so looking out a window versus looking up at the building. So I think that's the kind of thing that I like to try to evoke. These are just other renderings and things. Here's a visit to the neighborhood. So I'm going to pivot a bit here because the direction of the work is not just in these sort of digital virtual reconstructions, but I've been collaborating with a lot of different artists and really trying to think hard about, okay, I mean, it's one thing to just have a bunch of like virtual empty buildings or something, and another one to really think deeply about connection to a space. And I think that we have to be creative and be a little unconventional in how we think about reconnection. So one of the places that really got me thinking about what other multimodal ways can we connect was actually an article about San Jose's Market Street Chinatown by a group at Stanford, and they looked in the soils from that Chinatown was burned down and is gone, but there have been archaeologic digs there, and they looked in the soils and they found 350 different plants based on the pollens and the fragments of plant material, and many of which were heritage vegetables that might have been brought from China, grown in gardens. They might have been sold or used in foods or medicines, and they were able to identify many of these. Now, I think archaeology, when done poorly, it can be very extractive, but I do think there's an opportunity to think differently about especially the kind of information that could be living in the soil that is so different from the kind that is preserved in archives, right? You know, you can write down a recipe, and definitely people pass recipes down in families, and that's very important. But yeah, like to see like bitter melon seeds in the soil or jujube seeds, I mean, that's like it's a really deep thing that a lot of people today can connect to. And oh, and this is actually a picture like of workers digging up. This is an adjacent street, but a couple of years ago, the city of Providence did dig up the street, and they didn't have an official recognition of this as Chinatown. And I talked to workers who worked on that job, and they said whatever they dug up, they threw away. So I mean, it's kind of terrifying to me that's not better protected, and I hope that there is a better recognition of it. But it also brings to mind this thought that like we think of Chinatown as gone, but actually a lot of it's still under there. You know, and I don't mean just like that it's like, you know, we should extract it and get all the information out of it, but that there's some presence still there, and I think it's important to sort of think about that meaning. I also, Jesse knows that I have a prior life as a community scientist or a DIY kind of community-involved science organizer, long story, but I was really curious, like what if descendants or Asian Americans in Providence today could ourselves look at pollens and kind of recognize things, get to know what does jujube pollen look like, or what is, you know, could we do this ourselves and have this kind of visual relationship with the soils? So this is just from a sunflower that I got, but yeah, it is actually, it's not even very hard to look at pollen and recognize different species and things like that. So it was kind of an interesting direction. And it also made me think about, there's some empty tree grates in Providence today, or in the Empire Street today. And it did make me think, you know, of these a little differently, rather than just as a place where empty cigarette or used cigarette butts end up, but also in a sense kind of like a portal. Like there's, you almost could feel like you're looking through something into what's underneath the ground. So the other part of my work on this and trying to think multimodally is just to try to get things outside of archives and museums and into other parts of our lives. So, and also, I mean, I have a personal interest in a lot of like how kids relate to histories and things. So I draw the neighborhood a lot, and I do have a kind of long-term dream to do a picture book about stories of people's lives in Providence, Chinatown. So I have, talk to me if you're a book publisher. I have a lot of storyboards for that, but I was also very lucky in the past few months actually to work with another artist named Dreechu Tattersfield, who's a poet and a game designer, and has been collaborating with me on a bunch of other related projects very generatively. And we kind of dreamed up this idea of making like a VR in paper version of Providence's Chinatown. And Dree began writing these texts that place the reader, who we, you know, the primary reader we're thinking of as Asian Americans, places the reader in the community as someone who, you know, might wake up from a nap in one of these rooms and look out the window. So you can actually move the window around and like peer through it. But, you know, also the experience of kind of doing the reconstruction. So this is something, you know, we don't cut it out for you. When you buy one of these, you can get it on my website. We just received the second printing of it. You have to cut it out yourself, and you have to glue it together and fold it. And yeah, we actually designed it in a utterly chaotic and wonderful way in a Google presentation, which we didn't, means that editing it is really strange. But yeah, as it comes together, it is this sort of small streetscape that you can, you know, get up close to and personal with, and you're touching things, and it all folds up, so you can sort of experience it not just by unfolding it on the table all at once, but by unfolding it one little area at a time as the story unfolds that you are invited to be part of. And in this project, we really were inspired by the poet Roger Robinson, whose poem A Portable Paradise really evokes this idea of a personal and often private relationship with a place that is part of ancestral memory, that is, is so different from how we often think about history as being something like, in an exhibit or something like that, but as something that we could imagine like folding up and actually literally carrying this object in your pocket and having that kind of tactile and personal relationship with. The other part of this, and I should actually pause here and actually show the toolkit itself, is that I am starting to teach workshops around this toolkit for doing these kinds of reconstructions, and especially the digital portion of it. So there's this website. I guess I should not full screen it so you can see the address, but it's on my website and such, and you can Google and find it as well. But it's hosted at the Library of Congress, and it includes all kinds of tutorials and videos about the research process, the modeling process, and also like the soundscapes that, I worked with another artist, Ann Chen, on historical soundscapes. So it really tries to invite people into doing this. And the coming year, the second year of my residency, is all about working with people who are part of communities of color that have been destroyed or erased, and Asian American and other communities as well. And I have already begun working actually with Dri on the Chinese vegetable gardens outside of Portland, Oregon, as well as a number of other sites with other people. But my approach is always, I invite people into workshops. I work with people on their own passions and stories and projects, and I don't, I just can't picture how I would do a project without partnering with someone who has a much more personal relationship with a place. And so I don't just do remote projects on my own. But part of the workshops that I teach are based around this format that I call ancestral memory enclaves. And what that is I was asked by a culture hub in New York to develop last year a workshop format that was 3 hours long that got at some part of this relational reconstruction process that I do. And I was like, 3 hours, gosh, what can you do in 3 hours? And it actually really reminded me how many of the stories are most rooted in a personal or family memory, and sometimes even in just one photograph that you feel a connection with. So I took that original photo that I showed you, and I tried just loosely collaging other photos around it. It's not like accurate. I obviously just copied the same photo twice and used like a generic cobblestone image underneath. But I was surprised at how much it created a space that you could be within. And I began trying with other photos. So this one also, like, I'm not sweating the details. I'm not trying to make it like perfectly photorealistic, but this is a photo of a kid reading comic books on a wall in Korea, probably around 1950. And I just imagined like, what is above, behind, left, right? Could you step back and kind of feel this as a place? And I also did it with my own family photos. This is a picture of my mom in Seoul in around 1970 on a snow day. And she's like, making a snowman or something. And I talked with her about this memory, what she heard, what it felt like to be there. She told me there was a bathhouse a couple doors down, and there would be steam coming from the chimney all the time. So we put some effects in. But yeah, very loose, very quick. And a lot of people can do that in about 3 hours. And I've been, lucky enough to work with many dozens of people who've created their own memory enclaves. And to me, I feel like that's the very first step in a larger project, if people choose to, as many have, in reconstructing a community. I also have been inspired by this Koreeda film, Afterlife, which I think is kind of hard to get a hold of these days, but sometimes it's illegally on YouTube, so maybe check there. But it's also about reconstructing memory and doing so imperfectly. These are just a sampling of some of the memory enclaves that people have made. And then top middle is Dri's work, who later went on to work with me on Portland's Chinese vegetable gardens. And actually, Dri and I will be co-teaching a class, a 10-week class at the School for Poetic Computation starting this winter on these techniques. Let me see. How are we doing? Oops. Yeah, I guess I should talk just about a couple other things, and then I can wrap it up, and I'd love to take questions. But another way that I've been starting to, well, actually, this project has been going on for a long time, but only recently began happening, coming out of the planning phase. This is with two other Providence area Asian American artists, Vic Shu and Vuti Lei, who share an interest in not just like memory and reconnection, but also in like altars and ceremonial spaces and different ways that we sort of reckon with memory and remembrance. So we had a shared desire to try to engage with memories related to Providence's Chinatown outside of gallery spaces and sort of out on the street and in a space that felt more personal and more more direct. And so we imagined, inspired by street food stalls in Korea, they're called pojanggmachas. We tried to create a space that felt like, and we wanted to serve hot food and like have a community event. So we invited, we had signups and we had Asian American folks come and join us, and we had all these sort of activities to do. Like we looked through old photos, we tied good luck knots, and we also had these immersive kind of VR experiences paired with oral history and soundscapes. But we did it on the site of Providence Chinatown. So the people sitting here are looking into VR viewers, and they're seeing that place as it was in 1904. And they're hearing stories, not from people who lived at that time, but from Irene Luke Hope and Charlie Chin, who are descendants, telling their stories of growing up around this community. We also, we don't love the kind of Zuckerbergian like tech fantasy aesthetics of the VR helmets, so we reinvented them as tiger and ox and dragon heads, and so we try to recontextualize this experience, which, I mean, apart from being just sort of like VR headsets are kind of awkward and buggy and technical and not very friendly or smooth as an experience. If you've ever used them, they're still very young technology, I guess. But also, just trying to think of this more as experiencing a memory or traveling through a portal or of some kind, rather than doing VR. This is like a picture of one of the original sketch for the tiger head and sort of what's going on inside there. This is my original test video. And I've even taught a workshop with En Chen, who's shown here, on not only making memory enclaves, and we actually were lucky enough to have a projection space at Culture Hub in New York, but also crafting, working with people to craft their own masks that they can embed their memory within. So these are by a couple different people, and in neither case is the mask maker wearing the mask, but on this side is Anne's mask, which was like a wash basin that she remembers her brother being bathed in. And so she imagined that you would like put your head in the basin in order to experience them, to access the memory, which I really loved. This is Jasmine Huang, who made a really beautiful mask that's inspired by like a Korean royal crown, but made out of like snack packages and things. I think these are just a few more photos of the Library of Congress items that I've found, which I am beginning to think about how they could be woven together into an experience like the zine. We'll see where it goes, but I like the personalness of some of these items. Like this is an exercise book. I think this is the Jade Snow Wong collection. So 1937 in San Francisco Chinatown. The newspaper is a early bilingual Chinese American newspaper published in San Francisco. So there's all these really interesting items, as well as photographs from very different time periods and different Asian American communities. The Korean kitchenware is from Hawaii. These young people going skating is in, I think, New York Chinatown. So there's a lot of material in there. And this is Deadwood where there was a Chinatown, which you can just barely see in the far distance of this photo in South Dakota. And so I guess I'm thinking about how, as an experience, I might create like another paper-based experience where you would get these different replicas of these archival materials. And one thing that really stood out to me in the printed zine, and I have a couple copies if you want to see after, is that to create the reconstruction, you actually have to destroy the archival materials, which is a kind of an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about when I began crafting that. And so I've been talking with Dre a bit, and who knows where it will lead, but maybe we could like give people the original full-size one with like a dotted cut line, and you could participate in kind of unmaking the archival material in order to create Chinatown as one possible upcoming project. And this is Truckee, California, where there was 2 different Chinatowns. Both of them were burned down. And I think a lot of the stuff, especially in California and the West Coast, highlights a lot of the violence. I mean, there were the late 1800s was an incredibly violent period for many non-white communities, but learning about Asian American history in that period was, very disturbing, actually. And a lot of the upcoming projects that I'm taking on in the coming year are around Asian American communities on the West Coast, where the history was very violent. And finally, I keep saying finally, but I also have been drawn into some parallel archival reconstruction projects. So this is a stereograph from Korea, 1904, that's at the Library of Congress. And it is definitely, it's a white photographer who doesn't necessarily understand the importance or the significance of what's going on in the picture. But I do think that there's a really powerful way that when you zoom in and you begin to look very carefully, there are so many kind of hidden messages that I feel as a Korean American person I can receive that the photographer may not have been interested in or might not have been able to see it all. But yeah, I don't know if I can zoom in the presentation, but there's like someone eating lunch up in the corner in this build site. There's like kids who are smiling and some kind of inside joke is happening. And there's a lot of, really interesting stuff, as well as this shovel, which is a collaborative, it's a cooperative shovel that the entire group is using together using ropes. So I've actually made a reproduction of that shovel and gone like group shoveling. I call it the Together shovel. I've gone group shoveling with other Korean Americans in different places, and it's been a very powerful, literally powerful experience. You can dig like huge amounts of soil when you work together in that way. And actually just today, I found at the Agriculture Museum in Seoul, I found a picture of a historic shovel of that kind. And so I'm it's like on Instagram. So I sent them a message and I'm like, is this the shovel? So hopefully reconnecting it to that history as well. So I think those kinds of reconnections which incorporate action, which you're like touching something, you're doing something, those are just as important. And yeah, this is just a glimpse of the in-progress reconstruction of Portland's Chinese vegetable gardens that I'm doing with Dre. And sometimes we even get these beautiful, evening photos like this. But I'm looking forward to what comes next in that project as well. Thank you very much. I guess I can grab this paper zine and pass it around. I'll pass around the one that hasn't been cut out because the other one is once it's cut out, it's kind of delicate. But yeah, happy to take questions or talk more about different things if you want.
So I guess I have 2 questions. First, with the VR experience that you were showing, was that with the Providence one specifically?
Yeah, that's the one where I've done the most modeling and the most work. But the basic kind of workflow could be adapted to others. And we, in the memory enclaves workshops, we definitely have taken people's memory enclaves and made those into a VR experience as well.
And then, thank you. And then the second question was, when you're looking through some of the old photographs, I guess like because even the one you just showed with the shovel and all the fine details around it, like I honestly just immediately saw what was at the center there. So I'm curious, like, do you almost look at a photo now in different ways, like reading it almost like a book, starting in the top left, going across, or how do you like process, a photo that you see that you've never seen before?
It's a good question. I definitely have. Let me see if I can bring something up here. New Finder window. Let's see. Yeah, so like, one of these pictures, like the one I mentioned, when you zoom in, I think there's just a process of spending time with these pictures, just a lot of time with them, and it's not methodological. It's not like I have this one way of doing it or something, but like even adjusting the contrast of the image, or the remarkable thing about this is this stereograph is, you can view it in 3D, and it's actually quite powerful to view it in that way. But this whole side in the actual print is only that big. And so, even, the Library of Congress has these old like wooden viewers that, like from the early 1900s, and you can put it in there and look at it, and you have to be really careful. But when it's scanned, I mean, I have to feel like I'm the first person since like 1904, or maybe I'm the first person ever to notice that there's this guy eating lunch over here, because it was just so small. And also, like, who but I has handled these and has cared enough to look that closely? And I also, like, this is such a remarkable picture because this house is being built. And I'm also, like, as a woodworker who's interested in how Korean houses are traditionally built, and like literally building hanoks myself, I'm like learning about woodworking from like zooming into this picture. And it's so cool. Like I know it's like, it's a bit blurry, but I can see a lot of important details about this. And yeah, I just think you just spend a lot of time with these and you start to get to know them a bit. Like there's someone like, I never noticed this before, but there's someone like right around that corner, who's walking there. And I also found this photo, there's actually he took a picture twice. So there's another stereograph that's like, when you first look at it, you're like, that's the same photo. Everyone is in the same place. But it's like people are like they've turned their heads a little bit or something. And this person is walking in the background in one and not in the other. So there's also like these little details you find like that. And you're like, well, what's in these bags? Like, is that lunch? Are we getting a clue about the time of day, or something else? And then this, like, here's some more rope and like this big thing. Is this this other type of tool that I could find? So there's a lot of cool stuff going on that for me, it really kind of reinforces this idea that, like, yeah, there's all these messages waiting to be received. And especially as someone who, I feel like as a diaspora Korean person, relatively disconnected from Korean history and very attuned and listening very deeply, I often feel like Korean Americans or other diaspora Korean folks are like, because it's been a lot more work to reconnect, we're like paying extra close attention. And so we're sort of like here for these messages. So yeah, I mean, I just love everything about it. Like the shoes, they're like these woven shoes, woven sandals. In another one, there's like someone has put his pipe like in the back of the belt, so you can see all these like things like that. Or like how each of these people, yeah, here they're all like smoking while working. And I love how each person has their own way of like arranging their like, headgear. Yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff in there. Yeah, I feel like every time I look at these, I find something new. Thank you for your question.
I was wondering how you felt about having landed on these like sets of like product types, I guess, considering they're not your normal like materials that you're working with. Because I feel like the digitalization of it especially is really unique in the way that it like lets people be remembered longer, I guess. There's like something kind of spiritual about like, as long as someone knows that you existed or like can see you or think of you, then like, like you're still like present in that. So how do you feel about like the digitalization process?
I think it's certainly like, it's like kind of democratic, like that these stereographs, like you used to have to just go to the Library of Congress, and like I think like they were all digitized like last year. I mean, so I think that's makes a big difference. I feel like the timing is like, it's amazing that I'm able to get to them, and like this is not even the subject of my residency. I mean, it's thematically quite related, I guess, but it's like this tangent. And so I do feel like there's a way that, you know, what's happening on this riverbank, you know, that moment, yeah, like there's a weird personal relationship. Like I feel like somehow it was waiting for me to look at it or something like that. And I think that there's a tendency to think of archival materials as quite distant, as something that people don't necessarily have a present day relationship. And I actually, especially archaeology, there's a lot of Asian American archaeological sites where I guess for a lot of reasons, archaeologists are sort of more eager to be digging stuff up, but less eager to be like analyzing and understanding them. And so some Asian American archaeologists have been going in and just looking at stuff that was dug up a long time ago and actually like trying to build meaning with them in interesting and new creative ways. So I do think that the idea that today's communities have this special relationship with these archival materials is an important one, and that it's not just a matter of like recording everyone's history or recording the nation's history, but that specifically these things, you know, should be given access to the, you know, the communities that care most about them. So.
And then do you think this is like changing your direction as an artist? Do you think that this will be more of your future?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I'm building shovels now. Like why, you know, like I didn't think of myself as a shovel artist, but now I am one. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't know, like I think it'd be cool if this museum is into it, like maybe I could do a project with them or something like that. So I do think, yeah, it's interesting, and also, I don't know, I guess I just kind of like, a lot of us grew up thinking about like old family photos as like slightly boring, you know? But now I'm going back and I'm like looking at like what was my grandfather wearing? Like, what is this amazing outfit? Like, you know, there's a new meaning to it. And yeah, and I think it does happen in archival materials as well, so.
I kept seeing on your earlier slides kind of like thank yous to the Rhode Island Humanities Council. And I was wondering, like, before you got to the Library of Congress, how were you supported by them? Like, what projects were you doing with them and with other people?
Yeah, for sure. I got my first grant on this project from the Rhode Island Humanities, and where is that slide? Well, anyway, you saw it. Yeah, and it was very small. It was like $2,000, but it was maybe 2 years ago. But I remember it was the first moment that I could do it. I felt like I could do it like on the clock. I know that maybe that's like a weird way to think about it, but as an artist, I'm very used to, especially early stage work and the research that goes into it, being something that I just have to do whenever I can manage to do it, you know, in between paid gigs or whatever. And so it was interesting for me as an artist because they thought of it as maybe as historical work or public humanities work or something. And it was unique to be able to treat early research, pretty speculative research at that point, as paid work for an artist. And I think that's good. I think that a lot of artists, especially, I know a lot of Korean American artists. I'm part of this Korean American Artist Collective, which is really cool. It's called Korean American Artist Collective. And I've just noticed that a lot of other Korean American artists are basing their work in archival materials and you know, wanting to reconnect with our cultural heritage, kind of like I was saying about this sort of special hyper awareness. And yeah, I think that's an opening for maybe for the state humanities councils to connect with communities that they haven't typically been funding, you know, and to you know, connect with artists who are going to do interesting, kind of a little off the beaten track projects with things. They're going to get a lot more shovels out of it.
Hi, thank you very much. I've always been fascinated with DC's Chinatown because I worked at the Martin Luther King Library, which is at 9th and G, in the early 1980s. 80s, and this was before any of the street signs had been put up in Chinese, and before the arch and all that. And there were a few restaurants, and rarely saw anyone that appeared to be of Chinese heritage on the street. And so but I've always been fascinated with it, but it's not something I could study because I'm not prepared for Chinese. And so I was wondering, and also it seems like many of the Chinatowns were displaced with government policies or the government turning a blind eye to private interest. But it seemed like the Chinatown in DC was more of an out-migration. And I wondered whether, how as historians or artists or multimedia, things like this, how can we get at why people left when there's no obvious reason for, like, the bulldozers are coming in 2 weeks, you gotta go?
Well, I'm not deeply informed about DC's Chinatown, but I do know that there was a lot of bulldozing. I mean, like, there was a convention center built. There were a bunch of other places.
But the question I always had was, when I was here and I was working there in that neighborhood when that first convention center was built, but had the Chinese largely left by then?
No, I mean, there's actually a really good film playing tonight called Big Fight in Little Chinatown about displacement in Chinatowns across North America and extending into Canada. And very good visual storytelling where they show maps of Chinatowns, including DC, and they show how they were, specifically, portioned out and sections destroyed. I do think there are other reasons why people leave Chinatowns, but most of it has to do with gentrification and displacement, and costs, and as well as the fact that in many Chinatowns people didn't own buildings, so they are tenants, and then they're more vulnerable to displacement for various reasons. I think the Chinatowns that have been the biggest, lasted the longest, for a variety of reasons. There have been Chinese American land ownership, which was specifically prohibited in many places, surprisingly into recent history. And that was the case in Providence's Chinatown in the 1914 era. So none of the people who were displaced were landowners there, and it was illegal for Chinese Americans to own land at that time. So in later eras, buildings around Providence, and I just know Providence's Chinatown history more than any other, there were other buildings that were eventually in later eras bought by Chinese Americans and then made into like civic institutions, like the Online Merchants Association at a different era was like 1 block away and things like that. So yeah, but there was an era much later when people did sort of disperse a bit, and that is also, I think, has to do with affordability and with gentrification and with in many ways there are many members of the Chinese American community who became more like financially stable during an era when people were leaving cities if they could, right? And so I think that did happen in some places, but I think in general, like when you look at Chinatowns today, I mean, it's all the same kinds of things that are affecting many cities in the housing crisis. It's like, aggressive developers or city policies. Like a lot of them actually were, highways, like in Philadelphia, or City Hall, like in, I think, Toronto, things like that. Those are municipal projects. It's not just a private developer doing it. So, thank you.
Hi. 2 questions. For one, the masks. Did you end up keeping them? And did you find trends between what was created, like what everyone requested to have as their VR mask? Was there a sort of trend among that?
It's a good question. I've the 3 that we use in Providence we have kept, and I actually made a kit for Asian American kids to make their own tiger masks. So that, because the tiger one is mine, and I love tigers in general. So The ones from the workshop, people mostly took home. I was surprised by how they didn't follow like a theme. Like there was the wash basin. There was like one that was like, one was like a piece of land that you like put your head into. There was one that was sort of like a square head with like tendrils coming out of it. I think another one was like a butterfly that you'd wear. So the really like pretty diverse set of shapes came out of that, and that was pretty cool. So
Also, what is Unterbaum?
it's a completely meaningless word that I, in the past, at some point, bought the domain name for. Sorry.
So you mentioned as far as archaeological research on Asian American sites go, so you mentioned pollen and like remaining pollen from heritage produce species. Do you think that there's a different approach when it comes to Asian American archaeology and history when talking about different coasts? So, you know, like a larger trend of East Coast, like Chinatowns, Asian American enclaves being kind of displaced by projects like Providence street widening, Boston highway construction, where there's infrastructure built on top, making it kind of harder to access for archaeologists, versus the West Coast, where you have like arson, bombings, where the infrastructure is gone, but you still have access to those sites. Do you think that there's a different approach you could take for more local area history on the East Coast? Different things that we might be able to find?
It is a really interesting thing. I mean, part of the history of East Coast and West Coast Chinatowns that I've learned literally in the last year or two in this project is a lot of East Coast Chinatowns residents were refugees from the West Coast Chinatowns because the violence was so extensive and so widespread that people just escaped. That's also true of like Portland, Oregon is an area that many people escaped from Tacoma and other Chinatowns where they were driven out, where they were burned down. So that's obviously like a troubling history to be thinking on, but I think the result is that you're right, that there are places now, especially more rural Chinatowns and Asian American communities where it's not been built over by many successive, generations of buildings and things. And so it is just spatially easier. But there's also like, because of that, there's like no one there to advocate for the sites. Like Truckee, I think that the Truckee Historical Society has been vocal in trying to protect sites and artifacts, but they also are unwilling to reckon with the sort of racist history that resulted in that. So it's sort of like this weird situation, and there really are very few, if any, Asian Americans in the area who can speak up and say, well, we want this site protected for personal reasons or families. And related to that, the archaeologists who work in the West Coast, I've seen on more than one occasion that, and sort of preservationists tend not to ask the question, where are descendants now? I mean, like where are people who were displaced? And that may be first that they don't think of it as a living history. Second, that they lack the language skills and the research skills to actually follow up, and find people. But that just highlights the importance of Asian American historians and archaeologists who do have those perspectives and abilities, being, supported in doing that work. And I think Laura Eng, who works at Grinnell College, has been doing that kind of thing. She has a real gift for finding families who themselves don't even know that they are descendants of a Western rural Chinatown like Rock Creek, where there was a massacre, and bringing those people together like on Zoom calls and like introducing them to each other. And that's very powerful work. But that's the kind of work that it's not just like putting a plaque up. You have to you really have to be like, okay, we're really doing this. We're gonna like invest time and effort following these stories and things. But that said, there are a couple examples of East Coast archaeologic digs. Boston did a dig in the past couple of years, I think, and they were really hopeful that they would find. Basically, there was I can't remember if the building had been demolished or was already demolished and it was an empty spot, but they're going to build a new building there, and there are archaeological protections. Some of them they're state by state in some cases, and some of them have been ignored, like in Truckee. There was a site where it should have been protected that the city ignored. but there's usually now mandated digs or mandated like archaeologic work if you're going to build somewhere. And I think they ended up finding like interesting but not very old historical stuff. Like I think if I remember, they found like some old cassette tapes and things, which is kind of cool, like a mixtape or something. But it wasn't like as old as they had hoped to find. But certainly, like in a lot of these places, there's stuff down there, and in Providence, in particular, like you said, it's under a street, so no one has ever dug a foundation again on that spot. So, you know, I've seen photos where you can see like, you know, stuff during the demolition. You can zoom in on that picture and see things laying around, you know, like whatever was in the basements, I'm sure like was just, you know, covered over. And all that stuff is down there. I'm sure of it. So, I mean, having seen stuff that's been pulled out of the ground in Truckee, California, that dates back to 1878, I'm sure that 1914 stuff from Providence is down there. So I think it's really interesting. I think there are only 5 Asian American archaeologists of Asian American history in the US total. So I think that's an area that I hope will grow. I know that a lot of them have students now, and that's exciting. I'm meeting a lot of people, so I'm excited about that as an area of growth, but it's complicated. I'd love to talk more about it if you want. Obviously, I'm passionate about the subject.
Oh, yes. I think it's very cool and exciting that you it's like a dichotomy of like something that's very practical and like realistic in terms of actually, you know, getting a project to a finished state, but also very creative and generative and open in how you acknowledge that you can never have like a truly perfect reconstruction and instead like focus on the sense memory and filling in the gaps. I was just wondering if you could speak any more to that, or if you had any more recommendations besides Cynthia Hartman on people who are doing that kind of work.
Cynthia Hartman, but yeah, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Cynthia Hartman's work is incredible. She's an incredible writer, a very beautiful writer. And so for me, like I'm not a writer, but I do these other kinds of work. So I'm very inspired. But yeah, I feel like I am kind of working in a space in a different format, you know, that, yeah, I do think, so there is there's this term, re-existencia. It's by Adolfo Albanakinte, who's an Afro-Colombian scholar, and it's been written about by Medina Tolestanova, who's a Central Asian scholar. I'm happy to give you those names again if you want, but re-existencia, it's the reconnection with one's ancestors through praxis, through somatic means. So like practicing traditional crafts or recipes or things, and Medina Tolestanova especially writes in defiance of coloniality. So she's talking about things that have been kept and that have survived coloniality, but also things that might have been most suppressed by coloniality. And I think that's something there's a new publishing initiative called Babalar Press. That's a Kazakh Central Asian publishing initiative, and they're all about writing and doing crafts and artwork and weaving and playing music in the spirit of re-existencia. And I think that term and that idea encapsulates, or it sort of opens up a huge field for example, the Korean American Artist Collective. I think a lot of what we're doing is re-existencia. There's even an author, Linda Sue Park, a Korean American author, who writes children's books and young adult novels. And her work places characters in medieval Korea or are about present-day Korean Americans learning how to raise silkworms and spin silk in an ancestral way. So that's also re-existencia in a sense. So there's a lot of different people doing this kind of work that I think gets at a little bit what you're saying, that it's not just about like the most formal pieces of history as we might have, you know, understood it before, but like and I guess the last thing I'll say on that is I think this kind of sensory unearthing is more likely to connect us to histories which have otherwise not been told. Like the official histories tend not to include queer history. they tend not to include I mean, Celia Hartman is so wonderful in many ways, but Wayward Lives, in Wayward Lives, she specifically describes the experiences, the choices, the lives of these young Black women as innovative, that they were social experimenters. Not that they, in the language of the time, that they needed to be reformed or something, but actually that they were experientially expanding the envelope of possibilities for their community, post-Reconstruction, in a very obviously terrible time for Black communities, and that the lives that they lived were exploring new possibilities of family, of relationality, of sexuality, of all these different things. And I love that she positions that as she inverts this word innovative, which is like, it's like a Silicon Valley word, So I thought that was really cool. Thank you. Oh yeah, I do. What is it? 4:10? I have seen the movie already. Yeah, it's called Big Fight in Little Chinatown. It's at the Chinese Community Church in less than 45 minutes. Yeah, that's right. Let me just check. 5:30? This says I can get there by 5:08. Is that lie? Yeah. Okay, well, maybe one more question and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you. Appreciate it.
This is really more of a comment. I'll make it quick and brief, but it's because I am an archaeologist and I work in periods just like that. I do this but from the archaeological perspective, and so I appreciate first the brilliance of your work, also the criticism of archaeology, which is well placed, and also the recognition of the potential of archaeology for this work. And so, like, one of the things that I'm working right now in a 19th century railroad boomtown in Minnesota, rural Minnesota, an Scandinavian immigrant town. I found a receipt that had records. A saloon owner had purchased records, and so then I looked up the serial numbers. I had no idea that I could actually figure out the songs that they were ordering. Like in the first, like Amazon Prime, getting these records delivered to their home. And so I have this kind of soundscape in your words of this town, this tiny town. So there's just so much potential. I am like listening to all of your ideas. Man, why didn't I think of doing that? Because we dig up all this stuff and then we just don't know. We don't have the imagination to do this kind of stuff. So I appreciate the really inspiring work and talk. Also, oftentimes there's salvage archaeology. And I don't know if you've looked in Providence. There might be just reports that really, you gotta really look out there for them. But salvage archaeology is done all the time. And so the information might be there. It might not be great, but there might be some stuff there.
Oh, thank you. I'll check that out. Yeah, actually some of what I'm saying on archaeology is sort of repeating what I've read archaeologists write about. Like there's a pretty interesting one. It's like there's actually like an essay or something. It's called like Historical Archaeology of Chinese in California, and it basically is saying like we love digging stuff up, but let's spend more time with what we have. But also, it is very much a challenge. Like there's one item that was mentioned was I think in that same essay was it was from a campsite, an indigenous campsite where they found Chinese medicines bottles. And they basically admitted like they have no idea what the set of relationships were that led to that. But it is an important one especially because there's a lot of interest today in understanding how Asian settler colonialism works and what were the relationships, good and bad, between like early Asian American railroad workers, for example, and Native people, some of whom were also railroad workers, but obviously many just being displaced or attacked. And yeah, so there's so many, it's like the photo, there's so many clues waiting for someone who knows enough to connect the dots, if that person exists even, you know? And I think that those kinds of histories are precious for especially for specific communities.
Someone like Stacy Camp is Japanese internment camps. Student of Barbara Voss.
Oh yeah, Barbara Voss's team, like her research group, did the pollens study in San Jose. Yeah. Cool, thank you. All right, thanks everybody.